Hello world, welcome back to the Razor RC, and I thought I'd do something a little different on the channel. A lot of people like the maintenance type of videos, so I thought I'd do one here on the Arrma 3S line of vehicles. So this is an Arrma Granite 4x4 3S BX. Will also apply to the Typhon, the Big Rock Crew Cab, the Vorteks, even the Senton 3S, the Typhon 3S. So pretty much any of these 3S or 4S Arrmas, the plastic body chassis, it's going to apply to. And this is just kind of like periodic maintenance I like to do just to check the vehicle over, make sure it's in good running condition, and something I do, probably every few packs or so. If you're running on sand or dirt, I would do it almost like every time you bash. But if you're running, on the street or grass or something a little bit cleaner, you can do it a lot less often. It just kind of depends on the terrain you're going into. So first off, we're going to just basically disconnect the front and rear knuckles. And it's basically just screws here on the corners, pretty straightforward. There's a little set screw on this side that holds in a pin. I'm using an electric screwdriver just to make your life a lot quicker, especially when you're making a video. There's a little hole here on the front where you're gonna have to push the pin out. So I just use like a little pick, I guess. Put that there to the side. And with some pliers, you can just grab it and pull it out. And that'll loosen this knuckle here, steering knuckle. And just something to do, just spin this by hand. It should spin freely. There shouldn't be any grittiness, or it shouldn't be hard to turn. That would mean one of these bearings here inside the knuckle is bad, so those two should be free. You'll want to clean off this little drive shaft here. So you can just grab a toothbrush and kind of just wipe it down, get all the dust off. You can really clean it if you want with some simple green or something like that, but just getting the dust off is pretty much enough. It doesn't have to be spotless. And then obviously you want to do it on the other side. So again, just pull out the top screw, pull out the little set screw here on the bottom, and then go ahead and push out the pin from the front. And grab that, pull it out. And you can go ahead and pop off the knuckle now. Just brush off any extra dirt, dust. Okay, next thing you want to do, that's basically just to check the bearings. The next thing you want to do is to pull off the center drive shaft. So it's just spring loaded, a little bit difficult, but you can just pull that thing off. And we're basically just going to be essentially checking that the discs spin freely now. So grab both and just spin it, and it should spin freely. There shouldn't really be any grittiness. It shouldn't be hard to turn. You should see that input gear also spinning. And then also give it a turn in opposite directions. This will ensure that the diff is actually working correctly. It should be difficult to turn. That's because there's fluid in those diffs. If it's super easy to turn, like there's like almost no resistance, or you see some like wet spots here on the outside of the diff cases, that pretty much means that your fluid has leaked out, and so you want to pull off the diff and maintain the diff. I'm not going to do a whole diff rebuild series here, but this is just to make sure the drivetrain is nice and free. You don't want any resistance, because that will basically add additional heat to your motor, to your EC, and show that it's not running very smoothly. Now we're going to go to the back side. Again, similar procedure. You go ahead and pull off the outside screw. Pull off the little set screw here. And then you can push out the pin. make sure pins are relatively clean. They don't really get too bad, but you don't want rust or a lot of dirt caked on there or whatever. And then you can go ahead and pull off the outer hub. Give it a nice spin. Make sure it spins freely, no grittiness. Otherwise, that means you'll have to replace those bearings. Then we go over to the other side, same procedure. Pull off the top screw as well as the little set screw. And push out the pin. Pull off the drive shaft, make sure it spins nicely. Should be no binding or anything. And that's good. Alright, next we're going to remove the power module. So this is not too difficult. Just basically one screw there on the top, or on the bottom. You will need a 2.5 millimeter hex wire for this. Then you're going to basically pull off this red piece, so kind of gets stuck. Can be easier to kind of pull on the battery strap to pull that thing out of the way. Disconnect your motor wires and your fan here. 3 motor wires there. And then this part is a little more difficult. You pretty much need to pry the motor away from the diff housing while pulling up on this tab here on the top. So just to kind of give you an idea of how I do it. Generally stick like a screwdriver here in between. And just try to kind of pry it off. Once you can kind of get a little crack, you can just stick a screwdriver in there and then you basically just twist it with this latch already off the side. Go to the other side, do the same thing. You can kind of go back and forth, just sticking in between and twisting with a big fat screwdriver like that. That is the easiest way in my opinion. And just keep sliding it down and it should come out like that. Take the vehicle off to the side. Okay, the power module. This is probably the most important maintenance item I would do. There's 3 screws here on the back that you'll want to remove, because these are the bearings that go bad the most often. So just pull out the 3 screws here. And pull off the cover. And yeah, these 2 bearings are the ones that go bad the most. As you can see, I just replaced this one, so it's brand new. But take your finger, make sure it spins freely, no binding. It's really all the bearings that are gonna generally go bad on this vehicle. So pull off the other side, spin that one, make sure it's nice and free. And then just kind of inspect your motor plate. Make sure it's not bent. You know, if you see your motor kind of at a weird angle, good idea to replace or fix the motor mount. This is probably again the biggest weakness on this vehicle. It can bend that motor plate. There are other options out there. And then and make sure your D-ring is still attached. The motor screws are not loose, so take your 2.5 mil hex driver, make sure those are nice and tight. There should be a metal washer underneath them. Some of the early V3s, they forgot to put that on there, so if you don't have those little, they're basically like 3x6 M3 washers. Just buy a pack of those, they're super cheap. Go down to your hardware store or ask Horizon to send you a free one because it didn't come with one. You can do that as well. Yeah, and then inspect the teeth of your spur gear. They should be nice and full-sized little triangles there. If they're looking kind of chewed up or whatever, then you will want to replace it. And I like to also just clean out the gears on this. That's, again, one of the weaknesses of this vehicle. Dirt does tend to get into this power module, into the teeth, and then basically will chew up your teeth of your spur gear a lot better. I have a video on how to fix that. I basically put Velcro, soft Velcro here on the bottom that prevents dirt from getting in there as much. But yeah, definitely make sure these teeth are nice and clean, and replace the spur if worn. Finally, throw it back on there. Make sure your mesh is good. There should be a tiny bit of play, and then especially once you put the gear cover on, just snap in place. You don't have to tighten it down, but make sure the spur gear can move a tiny little bit by itself. There should be a tiny bit of play. You should be able to hear it clicking, spin it around a bunch of rotations, and yeah, that looks perfect. Hair on the tight side, but actually that might be ideal. Not tight, but actually, yeah, looks perfect. Okay, and so we're going to put that off to the side now. Grab our vehicle here. And again, just like the front end, you want to just spin these drive shafts by themselves. Make sure it's spinning nice and free. There's no binding. You can move these turnbuckles out of the way if you want. It should spin freely. These bearings can go bad. There's two bearings here in the center that can go bad. If you want, you could disassemble this whole thing, but if it's spinning freely, I don't think that's necessary. And then also turn the out drives or drive shafts in opposite directions. Make sure your diff is still working. That should have a lot of resistance, so it shouldn't be impossible to turn, but there should be, you know, slightly more effort to turn that. Make sure there's no wet spots on the outside of the vehicle. And yeah, that's kind of that. Now we're gonna put it together and go through the next step. So assembly is obviously reverse of disassembly, and I'll skip all that part because you know how to take it apart by this point. Okay, now that we got the car all back together, we're gonna do a little more visual inspection. So first off, just double check the shocks. There's really only two O-rings here in the bottom cap of the shock, so that's the only place it would really leak. Make sure there's no drops of oil here on the bottom of the shocks. It shouldn't look wet or anything. You just inspect all four shocks. Those look pretty clean, so no real issues there. Next you want to do is just grab each turnbuckle. Make sure it can spin like pretty freely here. If it's stuck to one side and doesn't turn at all, you may need to clean out the hollow balls here, or they may need to be replaced. Maybe the shock rod ends are damaged, or even your turnbuckle is bent. So just grab all 6 of these. There's 2 on each side on the front, and then on the rear there's 2 more on the back. Make sure they spin freely, just so that your suspension works nice and freely. And then next we're gonna basically remove this one screw from the bottom from the steering rack. So as you can see, there's a screw there. When your wheels are straight ahead, go ahead and pull that off. Remove that single screw. And then what you want to do is just spin the steering back and forth. Make sure it's nice and free. No binding there. You should basically be able to just flick it and have it move around. If it's not, then you've got some kind of binding in your steering rack. It could be the bushings here or bearings if you replaced them. on the steering rack. It could be these pivot balls, it could be some binding here in the hubs, but it just needs to be nice and free and move easily like that. Okay, and the last thing you'll want to do is to check the electronics on your vehicle. So go ahead and turn on your radio. I've got the SLT3 here, and then turn on your vehicle. Double check that both fans are running. You can hear and feel that this fan is running, but as you can see, that fan is not running at all. So I will need to replace this fan, otherwise your ESC is going to overheat. And finally, just double check your endpoints. I have a video on that, but kind of a quick explanation. Put your car on a stand so that the wheels are off the ground, and give it a full right turn. Make sure you don't hear the servo whining. A little bit hard to tell with this fan kind of going overhead, but go full left, go full right. Make sure you don't hear any straining, and then that means that your servo endpoints are not overextending, because that would damage the servo. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Go ahead and turn that off. Those are pretty much all the simple maintenance checks I do on my Arrma 3S vehicles. Every few packs or so, just kind of go through, make sure nothing is binding, nothing is leaking, none of the bearings are seized, and everything's operational. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Look for more videos soon. Thanks for watching.